The convoy moved without lights. 12 trucks in close column headed north along a snow-covered road less than 30 kilometers from the Sino-Korean border, their headlights off, their cargo bays sealed under heavy tarpaulin. From the air, they were nearly invisible against the frozen ground. From the ground, they looked like any of the thousands of military movements that take place along this border every year. But something about the way they were grouped, about the speed at which they moved, about the timing of their departure, told the analysts watching them on the other side of the world that this was not a normal column. The trucks were not carrying soldiers. They were not carrying rations or fuel or replacement parts. Inside those trucks, packed into shock, absorbing cradles and reinforced steel containers, were nuclear warheads. Not training rounds, not models. Live weapons, removed from a hardened storage site somewhere to the south, and now in motion through a country in the early hours of what could become the most dangerous moment in modern history. This is the scenario that has shaped American military planning for more than 2 decades. It is a scenario that does not begin with an invasion. It does not begin with a missile launch. It does not begin with a declaration. It begins with a regime in collapse, with a chain of command fracturing in real time, and with a small number of nuclear weapons drifting through a country that no longer has clear control over them. From that moment, the question for Washington is not whether to act. The question is how, and how quickly, and at what cost. Most public discussion of a war on the Korean Peninsula imagines a familiar shape: a North Korean missile salvo, a counterstrike from American and South Korean forces, a grinding ground campaign across the demilitarized zone. But this is not the war that planners spend the most time worrying about. The war they worry about is the one that begins after the regime is already gone. A collapse from within. A succession crisis turned bloody. A breakdown so fast that no one outside Pyongyang can identify the chain of command before the warheads start to move. In that scenario, the danger is not what North Korea will fire. The danger is what North Korea will lose. Across a stretch of mountain ranges and underground tunnel networks, North Korea is believed to hold somewhere between 40 and 100 nuclear warheads, although the exact number is one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern intelligence. These warheads are not stored in a single place. They are scattered across hardened underground facilities, dispersed among multiple delivery systems, and protected by a force structure built specifically to prevent any outside power from finding them all. From the perspective of American planners, this is not a stockpile that can be neutralized in a single strike. It is a problem that has to be solved on the ground, weapon by weapon, in the worst possible conditions. The geography of the problem is unforgiving. North Korea sits on a peninsula, but most of its strategic infrastructure is buried inside its mountains. Yongbyon, the heart of the country's nuclear complex, lies roughly 90 kilometers north of Pyongyang in a valley surrounded by terrain that has been engineered for decades to absorb heavy bombardment. The Punggye-ri test site sits even further north, deep inside a mountain range close to the Chinese border. Missile garrisons, mobile launchers, and rumored warhead storage sites stretch across the country in patterns deliberately designed to make targeting difficult. From above, North Korea looks like a small nation. From a special operations planner's perspective, it is a labyrinth. To this geography, the United States has long applied a contingency framework known publicly as O-Plan 5029, a joint plan developed with South Korea that outlines responses to the worst-case scenarios: loss of regime control, mass refugee flows, coup, civil war inside the regime itself, and, at the most dangerous edge of the spectrum, loss of physical custody of nuclear weapons. The plan is not designed to occupy North Korea. It is designed to identify specific objectives, secure them, and prevent specific outcomes. The most important of those outcomes is simple to state and almost impossible to guarantee. Not a single warhead should ever reach a foreign buyer, a non-state group, or an opportunistic regional power. If the order ever came, the operation would not begin with massed armor or airborne divisions. It would begin with units that most of the world has never heard of, and that exist precisely for moments like this. A small number of Tier 1 special operations elements, supported by intelligence assets, helicopter aviation, and electronic warfare aircraft, would move into specific locations identified in advance. They would not be moving into the country to fight a war. They would be moving in to secure objects, specific buildings, specific tunnels, specific containers, each one mapped, prioritized, and assigned to a team weeks or months before the operation ever began. Many of these objectives sit inside hardened underground facilities. North Korea has spent the better part of 70 years burrowing into its mountains. Some tunnels stretch for kilometers. Some are designed to absorb direct hits from conventional bombs. Others are designed to be sealed from the outside in seconds. If attackers approach, the job of clearing those tunnels would not fall to standard infantry. It would fall to specialized teams trained for this exact environment, equipped with breaching charges, specialized respirators, communications, gear capable of working underground, and detailed schematics built from satellite imagery, defector interviews, and decades of intelligence work. They would move in small groups, often in complete radio silence, advancing through corridors where every door could be wired, every junction could be defended, and every chamber could contain a weapon, already prepared for destruction by its custodians. But the deeper problem is not the tunnels. The deeper problem is the people inside them. North Korea's nuclear forces are guarded by units, selected for loyalty as much as for skill. Many of these soldiers have been told for years that the weapons are the only thing keeping their families alive. In a collapse scenario, their orders may have already evaporated. Some commanders may try to surrender, some may try to negotiate, and some, the most dangerous group, may decide that the weapons are now their personal currency in whatever comes next. In that moment, the operation is not just a military problem. It is a problem of speed, persuasion, and luck. Every hour the warheads remain unsecured is an hour they can be moved, sold, hidden, or detonated by a panicking custodian. This is where the second great complication enters: the China problem. Beijing does not want a unified, aligned Korea on its border. It does not want American troops operating freely across the northern half of the peninsula. And in a North Korean collapse, China would almost certainly act before the United States could, not in support of the regime, but to establish a buffer zone, a strip of territory along its border secured by Chinese forces, presented to the world as a humanitarian operation to manage refugees, prevent disorder, and protect Chinese citizens. From Washington, that buffer would look very different. It would look like a Chinese rush to seize parts of the same nuclear infrastructure American planners had spent decades preparing to secure themselves. In that scenario, the lines on the map would shift faster than any operation could unfold. A U.S. team could be inserted into a hardened site, only to find Chinese forces already on the perimeter. A South Korean unit could move toward a known mobile launcher garrison, only to be confronted by Chinese border guards. The risk of accidental contact between American and Chinese military forces on Korean soil would be one of the highest in modern history, and every encounter would have to be managed politically in real time, while the warheads themselves remained the central, unsolved variable. There is another problem most observers underestimate. North Korea's nuclear command and control system is opaque even to its closest neighbors. Some warheads are believed to be mated to delivery systems and held in dispersed garrisons. Others are stored separately and moved only when needed. The exact locations of mobile launchers, especially the road mobile units that have proliferated in recent years, change constantly. A U.S. operation aimed at securing a specific facility might arrive to find the weapon already gone, transferred days earlier as part of a routine dispersal. In that case, the search would not end with the secured site. It would expand outward into a country still in chaos, with units chasing leads across hundreds of kilometers of mountainous terrain, while the political situation around them deteriorated further. If even one warhead slipped out of custody, the consequences would not be confined to the peninsula. A single transfer to a non-state actor would change the global terrorism map overnight. A regional power eager to acquire a bargain-priced nuclear capability would suddenly find itself at the center of a crisis no diplomatic system has ever fully gamed out. And the worst-case branch of all, a detonation, accidental or deliberate, somewhere inside Korea during the operation itself, would force responses from the United States, South Korea, China, and Russia that have never been rehearsed together at scale under the kind of time pressure such an event would impose. For South Korea, the second-order consequences would arrive almost immediately. The collapse of the regime would unleash one of the largest refugee flows in modern history. Millions of people, malnourished and traumatized, moving south across a peninsula at war with itself. Seoul would face a crisis of capacity, infrastructure, and political legitimacy. The cost of unification, long imagined as a future achievement, would become a present-day emergency measured not in years, but in weeks. Japan, watching from across the Sea of Japan, would activate emergency planning of its own. Tokyo has long understood that a Korean crisis would test the limits of its constitutional posture, the structure of its alliances, and the assumptions on which East Asian security has rested for half a century. In Beijing, the calculation would shift hour by hour. The collapse of North Korea has always been, for China, the worst possible neighbor outcome. A regime that survives, however troublesome, is preferable to a chaotic dissolution. But once dissolution begins, the question for China changes. It becomes not how to prevent the collapse, but how to shape what replaces it. How to ensure that whatever government emerges in Pyongyang is friendly enough, weak enough, and dependent enough to remain inside Beijing's orbit. That goal would put China on a direct collision course with whatever government Seoul and Washington tried to support, and would set the stage for a quiet but dangerous competition over the post-regime peninsula long after the warheads themselves had been accounted for. And here, at the center of all of it, sit the warheads themselves. Not symbols, not deterrence, not ideological objects, physical devices, each one capable of killing tens of thousands of people, sitting in containers, in tunnels, in trucks, in rail cars. The American plan to secure them is not a plan for victory. It is a plan to prevent the worst version of failure. It is built on the premise that there will be no time for diplomacy, no opportunity for negotiation, and no margin for error. Every assumption in the plan rests on a clock that begins running the moment the regime loses control. So the central question returns. Could the United States actually secure North Korea's nuclear weapons in a collapse? On paper, the answer is yes. The forces exist. The plans exist. The intelligence has been refined for decades. American special operations elements have rehearsed entry into hardened underground facilities, recovery of sensitive material, and rapid extraction in some of the most demanding training environments in the world. The hardware is there. The doctrine is there. The political will, in a true crisis, is almost certainly there. In reality, the answer is more uncertain. A successful operation depends on an extraordinary number of conditions falling into place at once. Accurate intelligence about the location and status of every warhead. A regime collapse that unfolds slowly enough to give planners time to act, but quickly enough to prevent dispersal. Cooperation, or at least non-interference, from China during the most sensitive phase of the operation. South Korean forces capable of managing the humanitarian and political dimensions of the crisis without distracting from the military objective. And luck, the kind of luck that no plan can guarantee, but every operation depends on. The trucks would still be moving in the dark. The tunnels would still be deep inside the mountains. The custodians would still be making decisions in the absence of orders. And somewhere in Washington, in Seoul, in Beijing, in Pyongyang, men and women who have spent their entire careers studying this exact scenario would be making choices in minutes that historians would spend the next century trying to understand. The plans for that day already exist. The forces have already trained. The intelligence has already been gathered. What remains uncertain is not the capability. It is the conditions under which the capability would have to be used. And what remains unanswered is not whether the United States could secure North Korea's nuclear weapons. It is whether the day on which it had to begin would be a day anyone, anywhere, was actually ready to live through.